here too.
Okay.
We're live. Are we going?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
They're building the audience for you.
Fantastic. Oh man, this was a stupid idea.
You realize they can hear what you say.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll let people kind of trickle in here,
Yeah,
but let me go home here. Man, that's a good-looking guy. Okay. Plus, I want to see what you guys are saying here. So let's. Okay, we've got 3 people on.
6.
If you guys don't mind, just type who's on, just so I know, and maybe it'll show up. I haven't gone live before. I'm not that cool. So what I figured we would do is go over the. Basically, we've got our access port and our open source software. It's much easier to connect and to be able to add maps and things to the Tactrix cable. So we'll kind of go over the access port because it's basically acting like a mini computer. So obviously I have a V2 because I didn't get the V3 because when I do log, instead of just using the little 6 icons, I actually will log, and I'll show you guys how to do this with my full parameters list on my laptop. Am I making this is it super laggy or is it just me?
No, it's just you.
Okay.
It just looks like that on there. I think you're screened for us too.
Okay. So the first thing, let me move this out of the way here. So for those of you that have an access port, if you don't have the access port manager, download that from Cobb. Unfortunately, what they did take away was the access port race software, which was basically it enabled you or someone else to modify your ECU. They recently got rid of handing it out to the public unless you're a Cobb Pro Tuner, and I have no interest in being a Cobb Pro Tuner and going through all that crap. So unfortunately, if you have an AP and you didn't download the software in time, they will allow you to do it. It's $150 and you have to sit through a class so that they know that you're somewhat competent. So $650 for the AP on top of that. But anyway, so it's on the V3, it's going to be similar as far as what you're going to be looking for. And if we need to kind of zoom in on this, so you're going to go to your monitor, and this is what we're going to do is find the parameters we actually want to data log, and I'll kind of explain why. So if we actually if we were hooked up to the car and we actually wanted to start data logging, I'd go ahead and hit this once. It would say, "Are you sure?" And I hit it again, and that would start an Excel CSV file, which I'll show you how to access that on your computer when we're done here. So what I want to do first is set live data list, and I've already got my parameters selected. So what I choose, log list, not data. I was wondering where I had a bunch of stuff on there. So AF correction, which is your air to fuel ratio correction. This is going to be based off of your grams per air. It's going to let you know if it's pulling or adding or taking away fuel based on the amount of the MAF registration, and based off that, comparing it to the front O2 sensor. So if you've got a boost leak or you've got a back line off, your AF correction number is probably going to peg at 15 or 25, depending on what kind of car you you have. But next one, your actual air to fuel sensor ratio. This is just for the front O2 sensor, which is only going to be good, except for on the 5th gen legacies. It's only going to be good till partial throttle or about 60 grams of air. Beyond that point, you're going to have to rely on a wideband O2 sensor. This is an Innovate, it's an LM2. This one's actually portable. It comes in handy when tuning other people's cars. So I can actually hook it up to their exhaust, run it through the car, and it powers through the cigarette lighter. But for most of you that have them, you're going to have a gauge, and it'll make it a lot easier. But you can data log wideband with the access port and in open source. It doesn't always work. So if you have, for example, Innovate has their own software, I'll usually run that in parallel at the same time just so I know what's going on in case it decides to not work. Beyond that, boost, which is obvious, it's your boost, calculated load. That is, basically it's reflective of your torque. So the more load you put on the engine, the more stress. And again, it's basically going to be relative to what your torque is actually making. So this has been something that I've had more questions about recently than anything else, which is for your access port, your DAM, which is your dynamic advanced multiplier. What this is a numeric value that if it's not at 1.0 on the 32-bit ECUs, which is everything except the 02 to 05 WRX, it means it's basically dividing your timing. So if yours is at 0.875, that means you're getting 87.5% of your total timing instead of 100% because your car has pulled enough fine learn knock correction that it's going to permanently reduce all of your timing to prevent your car from exploding. Some of the newer models, it is much more sensitive, so just kind of keep that in mind, but don't ignore it. You can actually, on the access ports, on the Access Ray software, you can get in there and actually change the values of the frequencies, but I don't mess with that because I don't want to screw up. If it actually does pick up any knock, I want to actually pick it up. Dynamic advance, that is a numeric value that is going to be added to your base timing, which will give you your total timing. If your car is pulling timing, it's going to pull it from your dynamic advance, so you'll be able to see that, as well as it's going to give you a negative number, either your feedback, your fine learn knock, which is the next two. Aside from that, we've got our ignition timing, injector duty cycle. This is important, and I don't know, for some reason there's a lot of people that will try and push your injector duty cycle beyond 90%. You really need that buffer. It's one of those things, you don't want your injectors maxed out, and if you do, say your tune is done in the summer and you're at 90%, in the winter you're going to be making a lot more power. More than likely you're going to go beyond that point. So I personally don't like to go over 90%. I try to keep it in the 80s if I can. So beyond that, intake temperature, that's going to affect your boost, that's going to affect your timing. And then we have our MAF, which is going to give us our grams of air per second, the voltage, so we can make sure those two are in sync with each other. It also helps with scaling the MAF if you need to. And then basically we've got our requested torque. That's more so on the CAN bus style, where it's using that as one of the, I believe, on the x-axis instead of your accelerator angle. And so depending on your year of car, it will be based off of your requested torque rather than your accelerator angle. And so if your DAM is dropped or your IAM on your open source is dropped, it will reduce that requested torque figure. So it's relative to your throttle in a sense. If you think you're having misfire issues, you can do this roughness cylinder, and it gives you all four. You can look at them and see. If not, I usually don't select them. RPM, and then throttle position. This is different than, I think there's one that's accelerator angle. This goes off of the drive-by-wire settings, which are going to be different than what the actual percentage is. Beyond that, vehicle speed, and then your wastegate duty cycle. Does that help? Any questions as far as with the access port in particular? And again, I know this is a V2. If you guys have a V3, it's going to be a similar interface. It's just a little fancier. But any questions on this portion of the access port? Is anyone there?
There are people watching.
Just checking. So we'll get into actually the flashing method and how when you do get a, so basically what I'm going to do now is connect, and if you look here it says access port not connected, and that's because I was cycling through. So what I'm going to do now is connect it. It's going to ask me if I want to update probably, and I'm going to say no because I don't want to right now. Okay, it didn't. So in this tab here you're going to have your maps, data log, ECU data, images, and all files. So your maps are going to be your, what you can choose from on your AP to flash onto your car. So if you get a custom tune, you need to make sure to upload that onto your access port. For data logging, those parameters that we selected, so even though you can only see one parameter on the V2 or 6 on the V3, I've got about, I think, around 15 or something selected. So the data log, these are, when we actually data log when we're driving, it will save it into an Excel CSV file. I have downloaded one of these and opened it up so you can see when you're done, all of those parameters that we were looking at are all going to be here. And it does it by time. And so when I'm tuning someone's car and we'll do a wide open pull, I'm going down and I'm looking through the time and then basically looking at all of those parameters. So, checking to see, is there any, first and foremost, is the DAM or the IAM at 1? And whoops, you can see here throughout the pull it is. Other than that, is there any negative feedback or fine learned? No. So if you do see those things and you're doing data logs, stop. If you have a little bit of feedback, it's not too big of a deal. If you have a lot or it goes to fine learn and your DAM starts dropping, don't do any more pulls because your timing or your boost or both are too aggressive. So basically the first thing I'm looking at is, do we have any timing being pulled, and is the DAM staying at 1? Ideally, we would then also have a wideband reading here, since again that front O2 sensor is only going to be good for about partial throttle. But so we can look at everything and see what's going on. Are we hitting our boost numbers? We can go and look at our boost table and see if there's any fluctuation where there shouldn't be, and make sure that. And you can actually data log target boost as well. I just typically I'll know what the boost parameters are for the specific map I'm working on, but it's not a bad idea. Or boost error, I believe it might be called. So you're going to check on that, and you can see, you're basically going to have your RPM section as well, so you can go through, and if there was an issue, let's say that at 4,000 RPM, let's say it was pulling timing here, and we can look and see we're right at 3 as far as the load goes. So what I could do is, I'm gonna get onto this real quick. So I have all these, unfortunately not everyone does. So this is the Access Ray software, which they no longer provide because they freaking suck. So we'll just pull in one of them. So I'm running a low wastegate map, so I've got that note on here. So based on that information here, if we look again, so we're at a 3 on the load and we're at 4,000 RPM. And let's say it was pulling negative 1.4, which is kind of the first amount of timing it would pull in that area. So we're going to go to our primary ignition, which is our timing table. And we can look here, and all of this can be changed. You can scale everything. You can change the RPM data. I'll actually usually change the scaling on the load, because once you start tuning the car, you're making more power. It's not going to stay in the same.
So is this pretty similar to open source?
Yes, identical minus the color. Again, Cobb And the reason that is because a couple years ago, Cobb hired the main developer over at RomRaider, and voila, here we have basically the exact same thing. So with that said, at 4,000 RPM, I can look here now, and here's that area. So if I was pulling some timing, I would then reduce that same amount of timing, and usually I'll try to clean it up around that area as well to make everything smooth. I'm not going to save this map, but just so you guys can see. So if you have an issue with your timing, or if you're over boosting, again, you'll look at, this is based off of that requested torque number. Here's your RPM. Here's what I'm calling out for. So if at 4,000 RPM we were hitting 19-20 PSI, well, I know that we need to then change the wastegate in this area. And if you look at my map, you'll see here, I've actually got it zeroed out in where peak torque and boost should be, because the 5th gen running catless has a very strong tendency to boost creep. So I run 0% wastegate to keep it around 16-17 PSI, and then I introduce more in the higher RPM. So speaking of which, this is the piece of crap 5th gen bypass valve. If anyone on here has a 5th gen and you're going to be tuning your car, get rid of this. The stock map is 11.6 pounds of boost, and we're bumping it up to 17, 18, 19. This will actually hit it, but it's not strong enough to basically hold it. So at about 4,400 RPM, it's going to fall flat on its face. So get rid of this. And this is different. Those who are on here that have 4th gen legacies, you'll notice this looks nothing like the bypass valve that is connected to the intercooler on the 4th gen. So this thing, piece of crap. Anyway, so in kind of going, talking about, ECU flash and RomRaider, I will typically use ECU flash to make changes on the tune, simply because you have the same parameters that you have in RomRaider, but then you can flash it to the ECU without opening up another program. So again, someone asked, is this similar to, so I'm going to actually open up a guy's tune from a while ago. You will notice, so one of the issues with open source, it's not as clean. So you can see here there's a ton of grayed out areas. This is because it basically will give you any single parameter that's ever existed on any Subaru, and it may not be applicable to your specific vehicle. So it will allow you to click on the parameters that are actually useful for your car. But again, let's see if I can, sorry, I'm trying to, I can make it, let me go bigger. Sorry, this is kind of small, but you can see that it's essentially the exact same format. This is from an 06 STI, so it's not going off of requested torque. It's going off of the percentage of your throttle. But if we look at the timing table on this, and again, there's a lot more crap you have to sift through. You'll get used to seeing it, so you kind of know what to look for and what to expect. I think I passed it because I was talking. So, oops, no, that's the air fuel. If I knew what I was doing, it'd probably help. Let's see. All right. And so you'll see it's just basically color coordinated different, but it is essentially exactly the same. One thing you may find is it may have one or two more X or Y columns, but that's about it. Other than that, it's going to be basically the same kind of, it's going to be very similar. Any questions on either the open source or just the actual kind of what we've gone over already? So basically what we've gone over is just kind of identifying, and some of this, you're not going to want to mess with because it's changing the parameters on your car, but you can at least see with the data logs, and the data logs will look identical whether it's open source or whether it is through the access port. It saves it in the CSV file just like this. So you can go through and then you can see exactly what's going on with your car. If you if you're noticing your IAM or your DAM is dropping, you'll be able to see in the find learn column if there's a large negative number, and usually it'll be when you're at peak boost and peak torque, where you have the most amount of load on your engine. A lot of times it'll pull it then. And as far as, and because this has come up so many times on the 5th gen specific forum, the timing table on the Cobb off-the-shelf maps, it doesn't matter if it's the 91, the 91 ACN, or the 93, the timing is extremely high, and a lot of you probably noticed that either you're pulling a lot of timing or even your DAM is dropping significantly. So just be aware that the off-the-shelf tune, specifically on the 5th gens, is one of the worst I've ever seen. And that's saying quite a bit, because there's some pretty bad off-the-shelf tunes. Anyone have any specific questions on any of these parameters, why they're there, anything like that? I like to use the vehicle speed, because I can use virtual dyno to then kind of get a figure of the horsepower and the torque, or really it's to see what the gains are from when we started to when we stopped. So anyway, any questions on this stuff?
Nope.
Good. All right, so what we'll do is take a little 5-minute break so we can get set up in the car. I'm gonna actually have, I'll have the Accessport, because I have an Accessport tune on my car right now, but you data log with this very similar as you would on the open source, and actually, honestly, open sourcing, or the open source software, it logs much cleaner. It gives you both high and low values.
Tell me about the 5th gen here.
What about the 5th gen? What?
Somebody asked, tell me about the 5th gen here.
What do you, the 5th gen what here?
I don't know. I'm just reading.
Give me some specific. 5th gen what? Open source?
I don't know the answer.
Who asked it?
Lou. Sandino.
Well, I have a 5th gen, so we'll be in my car. So we'll go over that specifically. But with the 5th gen, if you have a Cobb Accessport and you're running the off-the-shelf map, one thing to, like I said, look out for. And if you've got a V3, I'll tell you the parameters that I would recommend. There's 6 that you can actually have up there. What I would recommend having on there is your... No,
oh, no, he was commenting on how bad the timing of the OTS map was.
No, yeah. On this, just so you guys know, though, if you do have a V3, log the, or don't log, but if you have your screen up, have these 6 parameters up. I always have AF sensor, boost. I'm gonna have to pick and choose a little bit here. Your DAM, you always want to have your DAM up. You always want your feedback and your find learned. So where are we at now? We've got 1, 2, AF sensor, boost, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the last, I would probably, last one's kind of tough because there's quite a few things that I would want on there. If you're concerned about your injector duty cycle getting close to maxing out, you can have that up. I probably would lean more towards either your intake temp or your MAF. Probably your intake temp, because, and you can see here, a lot of people are saying, I think I'm having issues because it's hot. Well, that's going to happen even if you're sitting in traffic. You can see here on this map, it goes up, you know, we're in 116, 117 degrees. It'll get up to 130, 135, and if you guys have a cold air intake on your car, it's going to go up higher than that, because the cold air intakes are not very efficient for the most part. There's a couple decent ones, but other than that, any other questions before? I know this is probably a little bit boring, but we'll do some quick data logging, and hopefully that should give you some real world experience and what I would look for if I asked you guys to send me some data logs. I'll show you exactly what I'm looking for so that it makes it so that we're all on the same page, and makes it so that I have all the information that I'm looking for. So we'll cut. It's almost 9 o'clock here. Why don't we take a 10? So right now it's 8:55 here. 9:05 I'll be in the car, and we'll go from there. All right?
Sounds good. Okay.